Writing is so much more than just writing. Some things, like story structure, archetypes, tropes, and genres, are universally recognized and are often given the most attention when studying the art and science of storytelling. But there are some things more fundamental and quite frankly less discussed in the discord surrounding storycraft and writing. And at least being aware of those elements will not only improve your own writing, but also make storytelling and making stories an easier and more enjoyable experience. For those that are new here, my name's Cameron. I'm a writer, an editor, and the creator of Wrestling with Words, a channel where we can look at how we can tell better stories while also understanding how the best stories are told. These elements are the 5 elements of fiction. We can look at this image when thinking about and conceptualizing the 5 elements of fiction. We can think of the 5 elements of fiction and our story as a whole as a place that we want to travel to. Laid out, we have the plot, the themes, the characters, the point of view, and the overall setting. For fiction writers, and most non-fiction writers, having a grasp of the 5 elements of fiction is a fundamental part of understanding how to tell your story efficiently. But I often never hear this subject spoken about. This can be perhaps because those elements are often assumed or become more of an afterthought when we approach our creative projects. As a bit of a challenge, I want you to think of your own, or perhaps someone else's story, and consider what the plot, the characters, what point of view, what the themes are, and what the setting is. These elements can be thought of and considered on the micro level when looking at a scene, or a macro level when looking at a story as a whole. As a writer or storyteller, it is common to think of writing and storytelling as a wholly creative and imaginative process. This is a perspective that I can relate to and remember holding dearly early on in my own writing career. It's natural when approaching anything creative to imagine or assume that there are no boundaries, no laws, and no rules. Some professionals may still hold that same belief, and I don't doubt that there are examples in which that is the case. But I would argue that those professionals, and in those examples, the 5 elements of fiction are deeply understood and are intentionally being enhanced, subverted, or at least manipulated in some way. I think a quote that really resonates with this point is one that I'm sure all of us have heard. Learn the rules so you can break them. And that sort of brings us to the overview of what the 5 elements of fiction are. Plot. We hear this term used all the time and everywhere, but the actual definition isn't always stated. The plot is a sequence of continuing events making up an overall narrative. This will be the what of your story. Setting. The setting is something that encompasses many things, and that single word does a ton of heavy lifting for the overall feel of your story or scene. The elements contained within that word, setting, are atmosphere, backdrop, locations, and the time period of your story. Setting becomes the where and the when. Character. Probably the easiest to conceptualize, and a thing that many of us and most of us are interested in. The characters of your story are the person, people, or beings within that narrative. This is the who of your story. Point of view. Often, a decision is made very early on in the developmental stage of your story, determining whose perspective this story is being told from. This element, I would argue, has more power over all the other elements than any other, which is something that we'll explore a bit later. But broadly, the point of view is the narrator of the story, relative to their perspective. This is the whose perspective of your story. Theme. And finally, we have the theme. Theme is the most abstract concept of these elements. This will be the central idea or ideas that are explored within your narrative. The theme can also be unknown to the creator or the consumer. Yeah, theme can get a little bit weird sometimes. This will be the what of your story, but more specifically, what is the point or what is this about? As I edit my own work and continue to work with others on their own stories, the main things I tend to focus on are the 5 elements of fiction. It can be a daunting task to consider, how do I improve my work? Or how do I improve my writing? Or what is wrong with my story? So the easiest way that I've found to break that down and to decentralize the responsibility of good and your story is to look at each of these elements individually. Every story is unique, but the farther I go into my own editing and writing career, the more important I find each of them being. Finding what is working and what isn't working with the idea of these elements in mind can often be the key to putting you on the path to tell your best story. Story structure is universal. Recognize it. The building blocks of storytelling and telling stories hasn't changed. Or if it has, it's only ever so slightly. And that is for good reason. The patterns and structures of stories are extremely recognizable to viewers and readers, sometimes on a subconscious level, but also sometimes explicitly. This always works to the storyteller's benefit. Certain genres carry certain expectations, and unknowingly dismissing those expectations or omitting those elements can often hurt your story more than help it. This always is caveated with the intentional subversion of expectations. If that is intentionally done and done well, it is often a good thing, but if it is unintentionally done or those elements are neglected, it can often lead to a disappointed reader or viewer. It is important to understand what makes a story successful and what about stories resonate with the consumer. Originality isn't what makes a good story. And oftentimes when we think of an original story, it really isn't, or something has come before it that's influenced it. And oftentimes, what we may think is an original idea has actually been done many times before. Nothing new has been done under the sun is a common phrase said amongst the writing community. And the dismissal of this pursuit to find something original or truly unique should be liberating, not disappointing. The pressure of making something that nobody has ever seen or thought of before is an insane amount of pressure that no one should put on themselves. Dismiss it, because every other story you've read or seen has dismissed it as well. Many of us will see an original idea or concept and think that was the first. But in reality, there was the same story or the same theme or the same concept that can be boiled down and be the derivative of some other story. Another quote that has been used many times is that good artists copy while great artists steal. To the writers and storytellers, we need to remember that there is no such thing as an original idea or unique concept. Instead, study the stories you admire and want to tell. Analyze them and try to understand the elements that made those stories great. Then steal it, combine it with something else, add your own prose or spin on it, and then tell your own story. The same sentiment has been expressed by many of my own colleagues, mentors, and other industry professionals. There are countless quotes from countless famous authors, screenwriters, artists, and other creative professionals who talk about how they saw X piece of film or read X book and was inspired to tell a similar story with similar elements. Don't concern yourself with starting from scratch. Look at what's been done before you and see how you can add your own unique twist on it. Study those elements of fiction of those stories that you've seen and are inspired to write. My goal will eventually be to dig into each of these elements individually and explore the process and some exercises to have a strong plot, immersive setting, compelling characters, effective point of views, and an authentic literary theme. College courses can be done on each of these, so my hope is just to explain how I approach each of these individually and holistically, and act as a gateway to encourage you to explore these elements further. In the meantime, let me know what you're wrestling with. Have you heard of the 5 elements of fiction before? What element do you think you write best, and which one do you think you write worse? Let me know which one you want to hear about first as well. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.